and welcome back to the Beyond Broadcast podcast, a show which takes a behind-the-scenes look at industry professionals and their lives working in the broadcasting and entertainment industry. Today, I'm speaking with Andy Rowe, a broadcaster, podcaster and producer whose career has taken him from little old New Zealand to the very top tier of global podcasting. After starting out in news and sport at stations like The Edge, Radio Sport and More FM, Andy's career took an international turn in London, leading to him hosting and producing the award-winning Rugby Pod, now ranked in the top 1% of podcasts worldwide. Andy is the host of also the Andy Rowe podcast and The Good, The Bad and The Rugby, co-creator of The Ins and Outs, Finding Wahine, and the owner and operator of Red 9 Studios in Christchurch, a purpose-built podcasting studio and probably one of the only ones in the South Island in New Zealand. Welcome to the show, Andy.
Thanks for having me on, Jamie. One of the only ones. It's the only one, Jamie. The only purpose-built podcast studio in the South Island. Mate, it's world class. You've got to come and have a look at it when you come down.
I'm going to have to, mate. And I think that this is the thing, because you moved back around about 2 years ago. Was this always the intention of being like, I am going to have this USP of being one of the only purpose-built studios in the South Island? Was it kind of like you had that immediate thought even before looking at moving back to New Zealand?
I always had a dream of having my own podcast studio. Yeah. But what happened when I moved back from New Zealand, I came back at the end of 2023, and the guys at The Good, The Bad and The Rugby, who were our rivals at the Rugby Pod, and I'd left the Rugby Pod and I came back to Christchurch, and the guys from The Good, The Bad, The Rugby said, we need you to put together The Good, The Bad, The Rugby Australia, New Zealand with Justin Marshall, and who's a former All Black legend. I don't know if you know Justin Marshall, but he's a legend, and he's a great lad as well. And so I was like, okay, yep, cool. And I looked around and I shopped around and I went to different studios and different people that offered the service of podcasting in Christchurch. And then I was like, well, there is no world-class studio in Christchurch. And I've done a lot of work. When I was at the Rugby Pod, we worked out of Spotify studios. So I'm never going to quite have the same level of walk in the door experience as Spotify studios in London, but I know how to create the end product that you get when you walk out of Spotify studios in London. And that's what I was trying to do with this studio in Christchurch at Red 9, because the guys at GBR needed a world-class product, and I couldn't deliver it with the what I had looked at in Christchurch and in the South Island. So that's where I had to kind of put my balls on the line and go, well, if we need one and there isn't one, then there's a gap in the market, and then it's just hope and pray like hell that other people need one as well. Which is, it's tough going, mate. It's tough going, but word's slowly getting out there, and thanks to you having me on your podcast, I'm hoping a few more people might hear about it and come down and check it out.
Yeah, mate, definitely. And I think one thing I should mention is, of course, I know who Justin Marshall is, mate. The blonde tips, frosted tips, mate.
Yeah, frosted tips.
Yeah, what an identity, mate. What a character. And I should probably caveat this. I've actually known of Andy for a number of years, because I was randomly doing some assistant work in a studio while you guys were recording the Rugby Pod in WizzFX Studios in London. So this kind of almost seems like a bit of a return, and also in a sense as well. It was pretty admirable for me being able to see a Kiwi working at that higher level in the podcasting game, especially when the industry itself in New Zealand was still quite young. Was it kind of something that you ever saw yourself getting into, or was it really like a situation of, much like many people in media, you just kind of fell into it more or less?
A bit of both. So I worked, one of my first radio jobs was on the Edge Morning Madhouse breakfast show, and I was their newsreader. And part of that job was also to put together their podcast off the back of, so we would just cut bits of the show, slip it in and put it on and edit it up a little bit, and then slip it out and put it on as a podcast. And that was my first sort of touching on podcasting, and that was like 2008, 2009. And it was just such a ball ache. Like, it was not something that I ever saw there being a career in that specific bit. It was the bit that was tagged on at the end of my job at the end of the day that was a pain in my ass, and I didn't want to do it. And then I went over to the UK, and I was literally just over there to have fun for 2 years. I fell into the podcast world 100%. 100% fell into it because I was not doing any media while I was in London. I was over there to have a good time, and opportunities just fell into my lap, and it worked out really well.
In that respect, I guess one thing I really have to touch on is the fact that you grew up in the boonies in Methven. Was there like an already early influence for yourself to move into media from that point? Was it like Port FM? Was it hearing hosts in More FM? Or was it simply like being from that farming, rural lifestyle background where I'm imagining rugby and cricket a huge part of the culture and you're already a fan of sport? Was that where you naturally saw yourself gravitating into? And was it kind of like you had this pull of being like, I need to go to the metro city to kind of make it big and like kind of get into the media space? Or was it simply a case of you thought this might be quite cool to try it for yourself?
Mate, I was a truck driver. My old man was like, this kid is in limbo. I need to get him doing his truck driving licenses. So you always have work, because you always have work if you've got all your truck driving licenses. So I was driving trucks, and the whole day you're listening to radio. And I was thinking, I've got better chat than some of these people, not realizing actually how hard it is. But it's the same old story for anyone that gets into radio. So then I applied to Christchurch Broadcasting School and failed twice, didn't get in. Then I got into New Zealand Radio Training School in Wellington, and it was a 6-month diploma course. And I remember the guy, one of the owners, James, standing up at the start and just saying, like, you've got 6 months to everyone, you've got 6 months to work your ass off and give yourself an opportunity to get into the radio industry. And I worked my ass off and got a scholarship to MediaWorks at the end of the course. I think I came second in the course. Estelle Clifford came first, and she beat me on the promo exam. Anyway, I got the scholarship, I got the money, and I got the job at the end of it. Went down to Central Otago and got my first job working in Alexandra, More FM Alexandra, doing the drive show there. And then I was there for 6 months, and I got asked to go up and work on the Edge breakfast show up in Auckland, which was a massive step, mate. I'd gone from Alexandra to Auckland in one hit. Usually you'd go up through the metros, and I just, a job came available doing the newsreader and being a bit of a personality on the breakfast show, and it just happened real quick. I probably wasn't prepared for it. Well, I definitely wasn't prepared for it. But it's all those experiences put you in good stead for later on, don't they?
Was it kind of like a sort of situation of the burning coals? Like you felt like if you didn't keep the heat going, they would have gone out. So it was kind of like you were putting the pedal to the metal and trying to kind of push yourself as far as you could, and been going to Auckland before you felt prepared? Or do you think there was also an element of you kind of made yourself available and became a sort of everyman in terms of working in situations like Alexandra, where you're probably the drive time host as well as the promo guy, as well as the guy writing the copy? Was it like, do you think it was a mix of that as well?
It was a mix of that. So you do the cool thing about going to a small town for your first radio job is that you get to do everything. You have to do everything. You're right. Yeah, I was a promo guy. I was the creative writer. I was the news guy. I was the drive show host. I was doing everything there. We had a team of about 6 of us all up, including the sales team, including the GM. But it was awesome. Those first jobs are what you kind of get to feel out what you're good at and what you're and hone your skills and hone your strengths, and like kind of work out where you're going to head later on down the track. And so that was a really good opportunity. But then and then I went up to Auckland, and it was on the show, doing the podcast as well, and doing other little bits as well. But it was a lot. It was a lot.
Was there any early advice you got from that job down in Alexandra, maybe the GM or something of the station, that you kind of took into those metro jobs like up in Auckland? Or do you feel like it's a completely different environment? It's not matchable. You can't really have the rural mindset in radio and take it up to the metros? Or do you feel like there were elements of that you did take, even though it was like a completely different like pace of life?
It's weird, eh? Like my GM, Sandra, she was epic. She was really good. But like the advice, like she had never worked in like a major metro. Like she'd never worked for a national like the Edge. So the advice she gave me was more life advice more than anything. And then advice that was probably in line with what my level of a radio person was at the time. But then when I went to the Edge, it's every man for himself. Every man for himself. No one's giving you advice unless you go and seek it out from some real old dude that doesn't give that. That's just their loving life. No one's really helping you out. So you kind of go in there and you're full of confidence and you're backing yourself, but maybe you're not kind of. Maybe I wasn't kind of. How would you put it? I wasn't really in a growth mindset mentality at that point. I was in a climb the ladder and get as far as I can and establish myself and be as useful as I can kind of mindset. And when you go on air, you don't, and when you go straight to the top, you don't really have much time to learn. You're in the deep end and you've got to swim. So I don't know if it was the best thing for me in long term or not, but it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun, and I've got lifelong friends out of it.
And it's kind of like setting the pegs in the mountainside. And I think that's the funniest thing from looking at your social media and looking at the people that you seem to interact with on a daily basis. I see like Dom Harvey is constantly commenting on your things. And it's like seeing that sort of like kind of group of, I guess, personalities interacting with you on a daily basis. You obviously made a very good impression very early on into your career. And Andy, one of the things I'd be almost curious to see is, you obviously had to sharpen your skills very quickly, but did you feel at any point that it was not really the place for you? Much like you've said in a previous interview that you always envision yourself working in sports journalism at some point, or sports in some respect. Did you kind of land in the Edge with the mentality of like, at some point, I want to use this to shift out? This is just an in-between. This is not like my everything, and I'm not going to say in like basically pop radio?
100%. I never thought that I was a long-term option for them at the Edge, and I loved it there. I really, really loved it there. I had a good time, and we partied, and it was awesome for a young lad. Going to Auckland, going to all the parties. You're kind of cool because you're part of the cool crowd, but there's only so much you can talk about what the Kardashians and Taylor Swift are up to. Like there's only so much. And then, it was always, I went to my boss, Leon Rat, at the time and said, he was right into sport as well. And he's a good lad and we keep in touch a lot. And he said, and I said, I want to move into sport. Like, I think that's where my career's going to go. And I think that's where, if I'm looking back on things, I've always been pretty good at is understanding where I fit and don't fit, and not trying to push it too hard. Like, I wanted to go and work in sport. I always, ideally, like I wanted to be like, I always wanted to be a sports reporter and a sports commentator. And that's, Leon helped me try to get into, what was Radio Live? They had a sports team there. They had a sports news team there back in the day. He was trying to convince them to take me on, and they wouldn't. They tried out there, and they said no. and then Radio Sport, Matt Brown at Radio Sport took me on, and I remember him likening me to himself to a panel beater, and me an old beat up car, and he said he'd be able to whip me into shape, and there's a few dings and things he can get out of me, but the talent's there. And I'll always be so thankful for those two lads for helping me out and believing in me, because you don't have to. There's so much talent coming through. Like, it really is. There's so much talent coming through and wanting to get into radio that no one needs to help you out. And it's just like I said before, is like no one's there to help you out. Everyone's there for themselves.
Do you think it was also a mix of the hard yakka attitude? Because I come from Christchurch, which I know some people would argue is not that rural. It's the second biggest city in New Zealand, I'd probably argue as well. But I come from East Christchurch, which is a lot more working class and like kind of a little bit more chill. Do you think that element of like the rural lifestyle, having yourself starting in truck driving, kind of played an element in how your career progressed as well? Because you're a lot more open to feedback and a lot more willing to kind of go the extra mile to prove to people that you deserve to be there, compared to maybe other talent that kind of just turned up and just expected everything to be handed to them. Do you think there was an element of that, of the small town background, really playing a part in how you progressed?
Maybe, Jamie. I'm not sure though. Like, because I look at my dad and I look at my older brother, and I know they both work a hell of a lot harder than me. So, and I know people with jobs that work a hell of a lot harder than me. And there's my wife works a hell of a lot harder than me, and it's so. So when I wouldn't want to sit here and say, you know, I get my hard working, my work ethic and all this sort of stuff from my small town growing up on a farm, because, you know, I'm a pretty relaxed person, and I think that, you know, it probably crosses over into my work life as well. But what I would say is that I'm OCD when it comes to making sure that things are perfect and things. I care about the product, the end product, and that's, I don't know where that comes from, but that's really helped me, because I'm always searching for ways to improve what I've got, and also searching for ways to improve how I'm doing things. So I think, you know, you can't have it all. Like, if I had the most amazing work ethic like my old man and my brother, you know, 7 day a week is 24/7. You know, that would be a bonus, but I think I've inherited other things that, you know, make me just as efficient.
I think it's interesting that you talk about eye to detail, because it almost makes sense that you shifted into sports journalism, or journalism in general, I should really say, because the accuracy and need for detail and among other things is obviously you would have learnt a lot about the preparation that's needed, especially when it comes to commentary and the accuracy that's needed. Was that a bit of like a learning curve for you, moving from music radio or from the radio
Massively.
from Alexandra to then going in and being like, I need to remember every player's name, I need to know exactly what's happening when, it needs to be to the point. Like, how was it for those first couple of shifts when you moved into radio sport and you're like, okay, I'm at the helm of this thing now, I've got what I wanted, what do I do now?
Yeah.
How were those first few shifts that you put in?
Oh man, I made some mistakes, bro. Like, I made some awful mistakes, and you know, when I first started at Radio Sport, I wasn't doing a whole lot of news reading. I was mainly writing the news stories, interviewing people, and then putting the stories together and giving them to the newsreader, who was like my sub. And I still remember Ricky Swinell. She was sub editing that day, and so she was reading the bulletins, and I wrote a story. And because we're covering some golf, I can't remember what the golf game was. It was a big game, and I'm not a massive golf fan. And I regurgitated a story. I got some stats or numbers or something, but it was from the year before. I put it into the bulletin, and Ricky's read it, and she's come out, and she's like, said what it is. Like, she's just said, oh, yeah, she's like, that was from last year. And there's just silence. And we just carried on. We had another bulletin to get ready. You had a bulletin every half hour, so you were just like banging out content. But it's little things like that are actually quite big. That's actually quite a big thing. It's a massive thing. but like that's a really extreme example of, like, you needed, other people would read your copy, so you need to make sure it was perfect. It was perfect every time. There was a problem when I remember Matt Brown pulling me aside, because you do like a 2 to 10 shift at 10 to 10 at night. So you'd be setting up for the guys in the morning. The morning guys would come in and they'd read all your stories on the morning bulletin. And I was just writing, like, there were so many mistakes in my copy. There were so many mistakes. And so it got to a point where I would finish my day at 10 o'clock at night, and I would sit there for an hour reading out loud every story that I'd written, so that I would pick up all the mistakes. And it was at that point that I realized I actually needed reading glasses.
I love that. But was it a case of just like grammar, or like in terms of the mistakes that you were making?
It
were
was
they
just
very
mistakes.
minor?
Typos, all sorts of shit, missing words. You're just bashing out word like on a keyboard, and you just like I wasn't double checking everything. I was just cleaning it as I go, and then you put it out, and there'd be shit that was wrong. It's like you just can't keep doing that. You guys that are editing that are reading your stuff have got to be able to trust your work, and I learned that pretty quick. Because you don't want a reputation as well, because you start getting a reputation in the newsroom of the guy that writes all the shit copy. And I had that reputation, so I had to fix it. And especially if you're in a small team as well, like if your sports team's like a team of 6, and everyone's on a rotation, and you really feel like you're letting people down, and you don't want to be that guy in the team. But it was such a good team, and you learn pretty quickly that you can't make mistakes.
I've always thought about this in terms of the journalist perspective, because I feel like in the general scheme of news, there's a lot more bodies and a lot more people available, whereas sports seems to be a lot more closed community, a lot more of a smaller team that's there to kind of enable everything. So like writing the newsline and a couple of mistakes, I wouldn't have thought of being such a big thing. But as you said, you're having to spend almost an hour after you've written all the copy just going back through to make sure it's clear. As a presenter as well, because I'm assuming at some point you got to present the news as well.
Yeah.
Did it kind of teach you to then kind of have a little bit more of the same eye as well, to make sure that you were catching up the next person who was writing copy? Like, how did that come about? And was there like kind of like an element of like the changing of the guard? Like you're like, no, you're the person who's making the mistakes, and I'm checking you on that.
No one was bad as me, so it was fine. But I think what I found with that, and I've never worked in a team like it. So there was myself, Matt Brown, Brenton Van Nistelrooy, Ricky Swinell, Guy Havel, Elliot Smith, and Nick. What the hell was Nick's last name? Doesn't matter. Anyway, like the team was like, it was such a high level of expectation amongst the team. Like the culture was so good in that team. The whole newsroom, not so much, but like that team was awesome. So there was very high levels of expectation as far as like the clean copy, the level of stories that you get. And I know everyone would say this, and everyone would say this about your newsroom and news team and stuff, but I looked across the rest of the newsroom, and no one worked as hard as the sports team. No one worked as hard, and I don't give a shit. Like they might have like 3 versions of one story, a news reporter, like a day, or they might push it out to 2 or 3 if they're busy. It would be pumping out, like sometimes you'd write up to 10 or 11 different stories a day, like you're smashing them out, and you're a small team, and you've got to fill out a news bulletin. So sometimes you're on by yourself. So the pressure for you to put out so much content, and we're all in that together. Like everyone, those guys would all look out for each other and all make sure that everyone's sorted. No one would go home early until the job was done. Everyone was there at least half an hour before their shift started. At least. And when I talk about your shift starts, it doesn't mean you start reading the news at the top of the hour. You still got an hour to sort yourself out. But the work ethic and the culture and the environment and that radio sport team was phenomenal. Then fucking Tony Veach came along and ruined it all.
I'm so glad you touched on that. And I'm going to touch on one other thing in terms of sports is, do you feel like you were at the butt of a lot more criticism probably than the general newsroom? Because no one's going to complain if there's a little bit of a copy issue or maybe a small kind of mistake within the national news of a major story, compared to maybe the sports news where you've got dedicated sports fans who are waiting and listening for those headlines to find out the latest about maybe the All Blacks or maybe their favourite football team or of the such. Do you feel like you guys were open to a lot more criticism in that sense because of the accuracy that was needed for you guys?
Yeah, I mean, we don't leave much room for opinion, I guess, in the news. When you're writing the news, it's just the facts and the stats and the numbers and what happened. I think the criticism would come from people judging people's opinions on sport, and that's more the actual announcers and things like that. So I feel like we're pretty safe, and as individuals especially. The only thing, if you start getting stuff wrong, then that would be a reflection of the team, not the individual, which is why the expectations were so high on each individual to make sure you're accurate.
And rolling back a bit, because I think it would be worth touching on, because you said Tony Veach and fuck Tony Veach. Do you really think he had that much of an impact in terms of the closure of Radio Sport and like kind of its preceding years after that?
I've got no idea what impact he had on the closing of Radio Sport. No idea whatsoever. But all I'll say is when he was there and he came back while I was there, and I wish I had said more to the bosses.
That's interesting because, I think that's a general opinion, I think, of a lot of people who worked in the industry where they were very much thinking, why is this happening? Especially at a time when you would have thought there would have been a little bit more open dialogue as to the decisions behind it. And obviously it's kind of further proven by the fact that he doesn't really work in the broadcasting industry now, so I guess it makes sense.
Yeah,
100%.
Yeah, it's I mean, oh fuck it. Like I'll just say it. Like I don't agree with the way that he was ever brought back for a start. I didn't agree with the way that he was given preferential treatment. I thought that was really crook. I didn't agree with the way that he was allowed to make other people feel within the newsroom. I didn't agree with the way that he made, there was a female that was crying after one meeting with him, and there was no accountability. There was no accountability whatsoever for the way that he behaved in the newsroom and to his colleagues. Some people would loved him, but if you were perceived to be below him, then you wouldn't have enjoyed him at all.
Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back in just a moment. Thanks for staying with us.
Do you think that's what's changing in the environment of radio in general in New Zealand, especially that there isn't these people that are held on pedestals to the point that like nothing is really said? Do you feel like
I've got no idea? Like I haven't been in the radio industry for so long now. The guys below him didn't get much of a say, or the girls below him didn't get much of a say, or get spoken to. We didn't get spoken to at all about what was going on. So. And I look back at that now, and I just wish I had the maturity that I've got now to be able to. And also, like you're scared for your job. Like you can't say,
of course,
you can't say stuff like because there's nowhere else. Like you can't just. It's not like when you're working in London, Jamie, and you get pissed off with your employer. There's so many other jobs that you can go to that where the same thing happens. In New Zealand, the media industry is so small. Like you can't piss people off. You can't burn too many bridges. I've already told The Edge that work's not for me anymore. Not that I've burned a bridge there at all, but I've said I want to be in sport radio, and where else am I going? Where am I going to go if I lose my radio sport job? Like that's my career over. So you're really thinking quite clearly, like what can I do about this situation? And at the time, you don't feel like you can do anything. You don't feel like you can do anything at all. Whereas now, if I look back, I just wish I had said something because, it's the bit, and I know I'm not alone in this, but that period of radio sport is the bit where I feel like I wish I had have said more. I wish I had have stood up for myself, and I wish I had have called out, especially people in senior management around the whole Veach situation. It was completely mismanaged and it was
That's a genuine fear for a lot of up and coming broadcasters, especially in New Zealand, because much what you said, it's a very insular sort of environment. There's only 2 networks you can work for.
Yeah.
Everyone knows everyone. Everyone has either jumped ship to the competitor, and then it makes sure that you can never go back to, obviously, the other. It's this whole thing of like you can burn bridges very easily from, much like what you said, just literally shifting job, not necessarily actually doing anything particularly bad. And it is kind of funny that there are people that are able to navigate in a way that it kind of doesn't really affect them. It's very Teflon. So I'm glad you touched on that, because I think it's one of the things that's not often spoken about, especially in the New Zealand industry, is that, yeah, it is small, and you're right. Places like the UK really open up the doors, and I think this is like a good time to kind of shift over to that, because this is the thing that kind of shocked me about you, Andy. You were at the top of your game in terms of, I know there were probably other things happening in the background, but you're working in your dream job, you're working in radio sport, you're doing sports radio, the dream. Why did you then kind of just be like, I'm going to up and leave and go to London? Was it purely because of the fact that you wanted to sink a few pints maybe in Croatia or go travelling? Or what was the kind of kicker for you to decide that, like, you know what?
That was it, Jamie.
Was that literally it?
That's pretty much it. So my thinking was, I'll go to the UK. I was on a 2-year working visa, and I was 29 when I went over there, and you can only get the working visa up until you're 30. So I was like, if I don't go now, I can't even go. And I always wanted to go. So I was like, I have to go. It was like the push that I needed. So I went over there, and my idea was that I would continue to do a bit of sports reporting while I was over there. And the first job I got was working on the 2013 Rugby League World Cup, which was awesome. So I get to travel around, and I'm reporting back to Radio Sport. So I'm basically still working for them and crossing over and, you know, doing stuff for them, and then I quickly realized that I was working a lot of weekends, and I mean quickly. I realized this in a few months, and I just couldn't be doing that. If I'm on a 2-year visa, I'm there to travel, to sink pints and enjoy myself over there for 2 years. And so I started quick. I just wanted to look for a different job, something that was a 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, and found one in recruitment, of all things.
Mate, I love that. And to be honest, I wish I'd actually spoken to you earlier, Andy, because maybe you should have told me the same thing, because I think that was the mistake I made. And when I say a mistake, I don't look on it too negatively, but I do look back on the opportunity itself of the 2-year visa, because I did the exact same thing. And I just spent all my time cranking out trying to get jobs and trying to work instead of actually traveling, which I look back on it now and being like, I should have done exactly what you did. Was it kind of like, in a way, were you kind of happy to be able to dip out, move into recruitment, much like what you said, and just kind of actually enjoy yourself for a bit? Because do you feel like up until that point you were kind of putting yourself on the coals, still trying to kind of get yourself through that career, still get some progression even up until that point when you moved to London? Were you still kind of thinking in the back of your mind, like, maybe I can make something happen here in radio? Or was it kind of like, as soon as you made that move to London, you're like, no, career is done, like, I'm going to focus on having fun for now, and then I'll go back to it?
I always thought I'd go back to it, but I didn't know how that looked like. And I thought I'd go back into the industry. And the great thing about the recruitment piece, because I never even knew what recruitment was when I went over there. I had no idea what the job entailed. And my friend Rachel, and she said, she was working there, she said, come in, it's just like lots of meetings, you know, you 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, an hour off for lunch. I'm like, an hour off for lunch? You get an hour off for lunch? What? This is amazing. And you get to go home at 5:30? What? And so got into recruitment, and it turned out to be a lot different to what she sold it to me as, which was why she was such a good recruiter. But I was bashing phones, right? I'd arrive in the morning at 8:30 and just start ringing people, and I would just ring people all day. And I'd be like, hey, Andy here, just explain who I was, and then they'd be like, no thanks. No thanks, no thanks, no thanks. And you just keep going. And the more no's you get, the better you get at navigating the no's, and the better you become at sales, and then the better you become at business. So the best thing that ever happened to me was that job, as far as setting me up to do business. Because, you know, what's a BDP when you're working in sports journalism? Like, you've got no idea what a business development plan looks like. You got no idea how to, and and all that now, all that stuff that I learned, on forecasting and all that kind of stuff, quarterly plans, all that I learned during recruitment that I would have just never known if I had just been watching sport the rest of my life.
Well, they've also been a big part as well, the whole element of being able to accept rejection, kind of keep bashing the phones, keep going and like seeing where you can get. Was there also an element of that kind of dipping into the whole podcast producer side of things? Because you would have regularly had to have been booking some pretty notable guests or going through PR agencies, among other things. Was there a little bit of that skill coming into play as well? Or was it no, like by that point you'd already got yourself to the level where like people were just, if anything, begging to be on your podcast, for example?
So on the Rugby Pod, I never had to worry about guests. But once I launched that, when I launched the Andy Rowe show, that was when it came 100%. That came back into play. It was exactly the same model that I'd used to do sales and recruitment. Was when I came to building a podcast. Exactly the same, like the same spreadsheet, and also like the same process on how to convert a podcast guest. So everything was exactly the same as recruitment, which is the weirdest thing. But I do remember in my first interview for recruitment, the director asked me, she's like, how do you cope with rejection? And I said, well, as a sports reporter, I imagine it was pretty similar to being a recruitment consultant. You're often ringing people up when they don't want to speak to you and you're trying to convince them to speak to you. So they do actually, there is like this hand-in-hand thing, like being able to overcome rejection and convince people to do stuff that they initially declined to do is a massively useful tool.
So then how did it come that someone managed to convince you to then move into rugby radio? Because as you mentioned, you were kind of just going about the travel thing. You didn't want to work weekends, but then somehow you got convinced, you got roped into doing this cool wee project, which was Rugby Radio, where you got to do commentating during the 2015 World Cup. Honestly, to me, it sounds like a dream where basically it was incredibly low budget. It was fans basically commentating what was on the telly. I'm assuming you probably sunk a couple of tins along the way.
We were on gin and tonics,
very, very posh, mate. No pins.
And then we actually had Red Bull, gin and Red Bull. It was vodka Red Bulls. It was vodka Red Bulls.
Jeez, that's
because we're like,
mate.
let's get steamed, but let's be hyped about it. So one of my biggest clients when I was recruiting was Chelsea Football Club. And a girl that I placed at Chelsea Football Club that I got a job for, Natasha Kane, she's a Kiwi. She married an Australian rugby player, McCaffrey. So she's now Natasha McCaffrey. She tagged me in a post on Facebook that the Rugby Radio guys had put up, asking for people to commentate. And so I met with them, and then they set me up, and they gave me a link, and me and my flatmate Tom sat down, and we commentated some Rugby World Cup games in our flat, drinking vodka Red Bulls, and we were quite good at it. I'm not gonna lie, we were good at it, and it was because there was absolutely no rules. There was no rules. You could just say what you want and talk about whatever you want. And we were talking to, there was a text machine that actually had people, it was probably the people that owned Rugby Radio and Respect, but you could talk to them. You were getting them to contribute to what we were saying, which was quite fun. It was quite similar to what the ACC do, I think.
The only thing I have to ask is, were you spending a lot of weekends at Belushi's, mate? Is that why the vodka Red Bulls were coming out? Because I definitely remember spending a couple of glorious nights over in Hammersmith, and I can imagine you were probably doing the same. Or were you spending more time in Acton Town?
I went to Belushi's twice. I had mates that played for the Hammersmith Hills Hoists, and so I went to Belushi's twice, and I went with those rugby league boys, and I didn't make a habit of it. Those boys could drink, and the way that they drank and the things they got up to when they drank, I wasn't going back for more.
You couldn't show face back in Hammersmith. I don't blame you, mate. I think there was probably a couple of occasions where it was the same for me. And I think the interesting thing is then you have this kind of weirder, larger than life moment where you become a sort of pseudo-celebrity by appearing on the Graham Norton show, which it's weird that, were you probably one of the first Kiwis to appear on the show? Were you one of the first ones that kind of made a solid impact on that? And how did that moment even come about? Because I think the curiosity has always got me. How did someone reach out to you? What is the process of you getting onto that couch?
I queued up, because you queue up to go on the Graham Norton show and it's free. So you queue up, and so I was in the line one day, and I got to the front of the line, the very front of the line, and they were full. So they said, we'll take your email details and we'll give you priority pass tickets to any more Graham Norton shows for as long as you want. So then I booked in to go the following week, and they emailed me back and said, do you have a story for the red chair? And I emailed them back and said, yep, here it is. And they were like, cool, come half an hour earlier and we'll put you in the seats for the people to tell the stories. And we went in, and there was 8 of us, and we went behind the curtain and queued up for the chair. I was about the 5th person, and everyone told their stories, and then mine made the final edit. And it was as simple as that. Yeah, it was frightening, but it was, and then what happened afterwards was just ridiculous. Like the amount of interviews I was doing when it got launched, it was crazy. And like every radio station in New Zealand was interviewing me. And it was when I was just first starting out in recruitment as well. So it was quite funny, because I was trying to work and I was getting these phone calls, and because I have so many people, like everyone, like, and I was quite easily accessible to the New Zealand media, because most of the guys I knew in the radios, and then it went really viral, and it still pops up. Like, I still get people sending it to me, like even people that I've clients that I've just met, and they'll come in and they're like, oh, I saw a wee video of you the other day. I was like, that thing just keeps serving me so well. It's such a good clip. Like, as far as for what it's done for me, someone listening to this might watch it and not find it funny at all, but it's like, that's fine. But it's actually done me a really good service. And then they pulled me back. That like about 2 years later, or 2 or 3 years later, they contacted me and said, where Graham Norton's doing a best of red chair stories documentary, and I had to go. So I went back, and they paid me $50 and interviewed me about it.
Oh,
it was
hell
awesome.
Yeah. Do you think that
cool.
the big thing with that was, because I think this is the thing I always find funny with New Zealand media, is as soon as anyone from New Zealand crops up on international television, it's immediately the biggest thing to happen. Like, it's almost
we are such great supporters. We're such great supporters of other Kiwis doing well overseas. It's so good.
Which is ironic. Which is ironic, because we shit on everyone when they're in the country, but as soon as they go out, everyone's like, we're so proud of them. Good on them.
Massively. But I think if you can make Kiwis look good, or make Kiwis feel good on an international level, Kiwis will love you for that. It's if you start putting yourself out there at home and doing the same thing, it's a different story. But anyone that makes us look good overseas is adored. That's why when the All Blacks lose, we're really unhappy about it, because it dents our psyche. So it's like, but when they do really, really well, we're super proud of them. Imagine if my story had really flopped. Imagine the shit would have copped from New Zealanders, like 100%. Like it's make or break. Hey, like you can't lose that one. Otherwise you get smashed.
Which is hilarious in a sense, because then it just became this massive trajectory for you for starting the podcast, which in its own respect is funny, because you've said in a previous interview that you wanted to always remain a fan and enjoy rugby rather than treat it as work. So it's funny that kind of became the absolute opposite, the antithesis of what you're doing, because it became such a big part of your life. But did you ever see the Rugby Pod, which obviously started not long after that, ever as work, or was it for you kind of just like you're riding on this journey of like constantly doing kind of quite fun stuff, even though there is an element of like effort and work that's involved in it?
I definitely saw it as a chore, if I'm being honest. Like I enjoyed. I love the live shows where you get to interact with the fans. But I felt like the Rugby Pod was quite. It was cool hearing stories and having a laugh. Like I love that, and for a lot of people it would be their dream job. But I have worked in the media for long enough to not be sitting there going, how amazing is this? Like, how cool is this? Apart from when we did live shows, they were so much fun and so cool. And that was the dream. Like I loved live shows, loved those. And we played. We were playing in We were doing shows in like pubs around London and the UK and on cruise ships during the World Cup at the O2. And I don't say that like to Sky. I say that that I pinch myself thinking about how cool that was. Like it was so much fun. The actual podcast part of it, it was just constantly talking about rugby, and I didn't really enjoy that so much. And I think with the good, the bad, and the rugby, I feel like it's a lot different. It's. I really enjoy working on the good, the bad, the rugby. There's been moments on that where on the podcast it's been like the live shows, the Rugby Pod, where I'm pinching myself, going, how fucking cool is this? How cool is this?
This podcast is powered by WizzFX. We make brands sound sick. Music, radio, podcasts, sonic branding. If your audio needs to hit harder and stick longer, WizzFX has you covered. Learn more at WizzFX.com.
Because something I find interesting about your kind of role within the Rugby Pod was you acted as a sort of mediator. And one of the things I do love is the idea of the fact that when you turned up for that first day of the record, you didn't even know who Jim or Andy were, which is gold in the fact when you look at it and from the long scheme of things that you guys had this such successful partnership in terms of working together. But the thing I love is then you kind of took over the mediator role, but then ultimately, this then led to you creating your own show, the Andy Rowe podcast. So what made you confident enough to go out your own after being the mediator for so long and then to shifting to being the face talent, the head talent? How did it feel to make that jump over? Because I can imagine it must have been a completely different kettle of fish, thinking about it from the perspective of you're kind of a mediator in a sense because you were having to help the talent kind of pull out the good parts. But how did you make that shift to interviewing people with some pretty crazy stories like Kathy Wilson, Eve Wiley, and Robert Mazur? Like you're working with some pretty interesting characters. And what were the elements that you took from the Rugby Pod to your own show?
Being able to ask questions. Like I learned a lot on the Rugby Pod on removing what my opinion out of the podcast and being able to focus on thinking about just the question and just thinking about what I want the people to say. Like, what do I want them to say on the Rugby Pod? What do I want them to talk about? And those skills were completely transferred over into the Andy Rowe show. So it was exactly the same. So with the name of the show, like I hate saying the Andy Rowe show, and I hate the name of it. But it was a marketing ploy. Like it was, look, if you listen to any of the episodes, you hardly hear me speak. And that's the same with the Rugby Pod. You hardly hear me speak. And it's all focused on the guests telling their stories. And the guests, like I would research so hard on the guests. I mean, I know every podcast says this, but like I know when someone's researching, when they're just having a yarn, or whether they're regurgitating recent questions, or whether they're chat GPT'd it or whatever. Like, but with these guests, I was doing so much research, and I would, if they had a book, which they usually did, and I would read the whole book. And the benefit of that is I knew that I could find out that person's best stories. I knew that I could get them to tell the best stories that they've got in their toolkit. So, And it was pretty much the same format as the Rugby Pod in a different way, that, you know, my personality didn't change and my approach didn't change, and my approach to the interview didn't change. It was just I did a hell of a lot more research for the Andy Rowe show.
And that was the thing I really wanted to touch on, because you mentioned before that you always felt your point of difference was preparation and research, to the point that, much like what you said, you do a lot of research, including one where you said you did 24 hours worth of research just for one episode. Why is it that you felt that you had to lean so hard into research and preparation more than anything else?
I think it's almost like an anxiety thing, Like it's a and a pride thing, and, you know, the OCD thing of like, how can I make this as best as I can? How can I make this the best interview I can? And it's like the only way that I feel I can do that is by getting the person to tell their very, very best stories. I can't remember which one was the one that I researched for 24 hours. I think it might have been a flop, actually. I think I over-researched. I think he had a couple of different books, and I read them all, and I think they were audio books too, so I knew how long it was.
That's the worst.
Yeah. So, but yeah, it was. I just felt like researching and making sure that I was prepared always got the best interview, and I always knew where the conversation was going, so I always felt quite comfortable.
I think that's it's a really good way to go about it, because I think that's always the thing with me is when hearing your interview discussing this, I felt exactly the same way, that going into any sort of chat, I know where the direction goes. I feel more comfortable kind of breaching into certain subjects because of the fact I feel like I have a better understanding of where you're at and where you're going to be later on, and not necessarily going in a bit like dark and kind of not really understanding the whole dynamic of yourself. And I think it's interesting because then, since doing the Andy Rowe show, you've then gone on to create and produce the Ins and Outs, Finding Wahine, as you mentioned before, the good, the bad, and the rugby. Like, how is it that you're managing to be able to dip into so many different subject matters and still have the confidence to kind of feel like I can tackle these sorts of projects? Or is it kind of like you feel like you've got the systems in place that you can go into different subject matter reasonably confidently?
Well, the Ins and Outs and Finding Wahine, I'm not the talent, so I'm trying to teach the talent and guide the talent on how to best manage every podcast episode that they're on. And I think that's where what I've learned over my years of experience is like kind of seeing how a rookie or seeing how a new person sits down and does a podcast and going, okay, what are they really good at? Because everyone's different, and you want to be able to almost like highlight that person's strengths and that person's personalities. So you always sort of focus in on those, and that's where I've kind of been quite confident in that if there's interviews or questions to be asked, I can help the podcaster and guide them on how to interview and prep the best, and that's where I've been quite confident in that respect. The good, the bad, the rugby is kind of it's a different one again in that it's similar to the Rugby Pod, but it's a lot less formatted as far as like what my role is. Like I'm quite it's quite a bit more. It's a lot more relaxing and chatting with Marshy and JP. It's super chilled, and it's a different vibe.
Your editing process I found incredibly interesting was the fact that you use almost two producers to do editing. So you do the first line of recording, then you have two layers of editors who go through your content to get it to the best possible product at the end of the day. Now, the thing I find interesting is it hard sometimes to remain objective after you've had two other editors go through your interviews and then tell you, like, Andy, this doesn't work, or hey, we've cut this out, when maybe you really liked a certain piece? Is it kind of hard to take that step back sometimes when trying to get the perfect product and acknowledge like sometimes other people will have a better idea of what is going to work and what isn't?
So I don't do that anymore, but I used to do that for the Andy Rowe show when when I was in London, I did that. When I first started the Andy Rowe show, I was just doing the research and the interviewing, and then the other two guys that they'd run the edits over. And I think what it did was it really trimmed out any fat and made it a lot punchier. And it's sometimes it's good to remove yourself from the content, because if they're thinking something's a bit shit, the audience is going to feel like something's a bit shit. Whereas if you're attached to it and you're like, no, leave that in, it's really important to the story. It's like, well, it might be important to the story in your head because you've done all the research and you understand everything. But like the product of the podcast is different from anything that you've been consuming when you've researched it. The product, the podcast, needs to be able to pick this up, listen to it, and for it to all make sense, and then for them to be entertained from the start. So if someone wants to edit my stuff, I've got editors that work at Red 9. I'll always say be brutal. If you're thinking about removing it, remove it. If something is if something's lagged a little bit, remove it. Always err on the side of remove, cut, get rid of it. And yeah, I always say be brutal. Always be brutal. That's because you can't be precious about your content. Because that's not gonna help you in the long term. You've got to be precious about what you do to get the content, and then if someone else is editing it, those fresh ears are so valuable. You got to let them work.
And speaking of Red 9, because I think it is an appropriate time to talk about the studios itself, and I'm curious as well, because you made the decision to move back to New Zealand 2 or 3 years ago. Was Red 9 the catalyst for that? Was your intention always that you were coming back to New Zealand to set up your own business, or was it kind of like you wanted to return home, you wanted to have a meat pie, mince and cheese, you were getting a bit over the steak bakes from Greg's, and you just like thought, you know what, I need to go back home and actually have some real food? Or was it solely Red 9 was the focus, that was why you came back? You had this idea, I want to start a podcast studio in New Zealand, in the South Island, and become one of the only studios specifically made for this in the South Island.
The only, Jamie, the only studio.
The only, yes, exactly, the only.
No, we always intended to come home at some point, my wife and I, and I've been over there for over 10 years. I'm a British citizen now, got my citizenship, my passport, and we were lucky enough to have our first child in February of 2024. So the decision was made at that point in 2023 that we're like, let's go home to have our child, because if we don't go home now, we never will. And we really missed our families, and you always miss your families, but it's like, and you think, I'm always going to move home. And that was the right time for me to go, it's happening. We're going. Like, there's only so many times you can go to Greece. I love Greece. I love Turkey. I love Europe. I love the Mediterranean, and I miss those holidays dearly, especially when it's winter in New Zealand and you're looking on your mate's Instagram and they're over there having a ball. But the family brought me home. 100% family brought me home, and then the Red 9 Studios bit came after. Like, I thought I would be creating these podcasts. I'd continue doing the ins and outs, and I'd continue. I did the Finding Wahine, which was awesome, and then the Good, the Bad, the Rugby came along, and that's when we decided there was a real need for a world-class studio in Christchurch, and that's when we started Red 9 Studios.
And you talked about how recruitment played a little bit of a crucial part in the early days of you setting up the studios and starting your own business. Like, what has been some of the interesting parts of making that dip into, starting your own business? Because having a podcast, creating a podcast, a creative thing in one sense, is completely different from setting up a business. What do you think has been the biggest learning curve for you in that sense?
Oh, mate, I'm learning so much. I think people knowing that I exist is the biggest part. Like, just getting your name out there, because people don't know that you're a business until you kind of get in front of them. So that part of recruitment is the key as well. It's like, you've just got to get on the phones, you've got to send the emails, you've got to follow it up with phone call, you got to interact with people on LinkedIn, all that kind of stuff that you learn in recruitment. All that dog work that you hated is the bit that was preparing you to start your own business. And mate, I'm only 2 years in, so like the amount of business knowledge I've got is so minimal. But the cool thing is that the business is working and people are using it and people are happy with it. So I've just got to keep pushing my projects that are going to get me in front of the right companies that want to create podcasts. And that's the thing, is like we're seeing a massive increase in New Zealand now. Like the wave is coming of companies understanding the value of thought leadership on podcasts and creating their own content on podcasts and creating their own podcasts, and the amount of content that you can get from 1 hour of podcasting, and how you can repurpose it for videos and all that kind of stuff across all your social media channels. The value in that, people are starting to realize, but it's now my job to put my product in front of the people that are understanding their value and getting my name out there, getting Red 9 Studios' name out there so that people understand that we're here.
And in that respect as well, what is it like being the introduction for many businesses and corporate businesses particularly to dipping into podcasts? Because as you said, it's still a growing business. It's a wave. Podcasting is finally becoming a lot bigger in New Zealand. And how did it feel for you to work with some clients that this might have been their first ever exposure to making their own podcast? Was it quite like, in a way, like humbling? Like, did you feel like you were like kind of steering them in the right direction? It was educational. How was it to have those first couple of clients that were kind of like, yeah, we've never done this before, like teach us your ways, Andy?
It's always interesting because you don't know how much people know or how good people are at talking, or everyone's completely different, or what their expectations are on what you can provide them. And we can provide a service right from the idea of the podcast all the way through. And it's always cool when they leave the studio and they just say something like, or when they arrive at the studio and they're like, oh, this is so cool. This is so cool. That's the cool bit. That's the cool bit. And then seeing their content, crisp, clear videos and like perfect sound on Instagram, you're like, yes, this is cool. You seeing people you don't know interact with their stuff, and that's cool. I love that. I love seeing the end product. It's really, really rewarding. Really rewarding.
And talking in a more general sense, because now podcasting is more crowded than ever. Maybe not so much in New Zealand, but globally it is. And what would you say to anyone who's now looking at getting into podcasting or looking at setting up their own creative project in this space? What would you say is maybe a classic thing that people misunderstand from starting a podcast or obviously getting into this space?
Yeah, it's not crowded. Like there's this massive misconception that it's crowded and it's too late to start your podcast because everyone's got one. It's just ridiculous. Like the amount of podcasts, like compare it to if you were starting a business, if you had a business, would you not have an Instagram because everyone else has got one? Would you not have a LinkedIn page because everyone else has got one? Like if there's people out there that you think, whether that's within your own business, within your own industry, or customers or colleagues or whatever it is, that you would like to speak to, that you would like to get in front of, then you can do that with a podcast. And do you know what? Like the cool thing, so I'll tell you about this project I'm doing. This is an example of that. So I'm working on a project at the moment. I've got someone coming in for an interview in 20 minutes, and the project is called In the Black and Red. It's a podcast series, right? I'm not expecting it to do very well as far as downloads, whatever. The idea is that I am able to interview people from around Christchurch, the South Island initially, and if it does well, then I can branch out. They're half-hour interviews and they're businesses. So let's say if I wanted to have a coffee with the CEO of a company, would I be able to necessarily do that as Red 9 Studios? Probably not. But if I was able to say to that CEO, do you want to come on a podcast with me? and you can take away all the content. We'll publish all the content. There's value in that for them. And that's basically my coffee date with them. So they will come in and I will have a coffee with them. And that's my business doing that. So every other business can do that. Every other business can have their own podcast where they interview potential clients, customers, industry experts, whatever it is. So my idea with In the Black and Red is that it's a case study that I can show people that, you can get in the room with these people and you can have conversations with people and show that they're thought leaders and put out this amazing content without having to book them in for a coffee or a beer or whatever, which is still great. Like ideally that's what you want, but this is a really good way around it. If you're a meat company, you can have really cool conversations with barbecue people that, so let's say you're a meat company and you want to go, oh, we want to do a podcast. We don't want to know what on. Get someone that's an epic cook, an epic barbecue person. So then all your customers, people that are buying meat, go and buy the meat that you're telling them to buy, which is your meat or whatever. I'm going off on a tangent here, but that's every industry can do that. I've got a Super Rugby team starting a podcast soon in here, and like they want to have their players being able to tell their stories directly to their fans, and it's like get to know these players, all these young players coming through. How are they going to do that? Well, they're going to do it with the podcast. They've already got a big social media following, so it helps. But there's just so much value in podcasting that people can get, and it's not necessarily about trying to be Joe Rogan. It's not trying to be the next big thing. It's not trying to look at your KPIs on like how many downloads, because often like the downloads might not be where you get your massive engagement. Downloads might not be where you get your big return. It might be that your podcast does well on TikTok. It might be that it does well on Instagram. It might be Facebook, or it could be on LinkedIn. But you're able to create so much content by just sitting down and recording a podcast. So there's value that comes off it that you often don't see.
And Andy, if people want to get in contact with you and obviously work with you, more importantly, how can they do so?
red9studios.com is our website, and you'll see some of the clients that we've worked with on there, or just email me studio@red9studios.com, or hit me up on LinkedIn, on Instagram as well. Like, check me out, Andy Rowe. I'm on there somewhere. Just flick me a message. I'm always available, always looking for new business.
Listening to this episode of the Beyond Broadcast podcast, proudly sponsored by WizzFX, specialists in audio branding. If you enjoyed the show, give a 5-star review on your preferred podcast platform. You can connect with the show on Instagram @Beyond Broadcast Pod and subscribe for updates on new episodes.